Mom, who am I in your heart? That question was never spoken out loud, but a quiet little boy carried it deep inside him, through years of silence and shadows. Until one rainy morning, a knock on the door changed everything. A woman who thought she had lost it everything, discovered she was someone's everything. If you believe life has a way of bringing people together when they need it most, this story will stay with you. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more moving, heartfelt stories that touch the soul. The little bell above the cafe door jingled softly as Samuel Reynolds stepped inside, one hand gently resting on the shoulder of his 9-year-old son, Jonah. The late afternoon sun spilled through the windows, casting golden stripes across the checkered floor and onto the polished wooden tables. Laughter floated around the room like dust in sunlight. Silverware clinked against plates, and the scent of roasted coffee beans warmed the air. But none of it registered for Samuel, not yet. Jonah tugged at his father's coat sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, that waitress, she looks like Mom." Samuel barely heard the words, but something in the tone, soft, stunned, almost reverent, made him glance up instinctively. And that was when his world stood still. Across the room, moving between tables with a small notepad tucked under one arm, was a young woman with dark chestnut hair pulled into a neat ponytail. Her profile was lit softly by the sun, and in that glow Samuel saw a ghost. The curve of her cheek, the gentle furrow of her brow, even the graceful way she turned her head, it all echoed the memory of Isabel, his late wife, the woman he'd buried nearly 3 years ago. For a moment he couldn't breathe. His chest tightened, as if the years between now and the day he laid Isabel to rest had suddenly collapsed. His hands trembled slightly and his throat ran dry. Jonah whispered again, this time more urgently. "Dad, she really looks like Mom." Samuel nodded slowly, eyes still locked on the woman. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. And yet, the waitress looked up, catching his gaze. Her expression softened into a gentle, almost uncertain smile. And when she spoke, her voice sent a chill down his spine. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked kindly. Even her voice held the same cadence, the same melodic warmth that had once soothed him through restless nights. Samuel opened his mouth, but no words came. He was drowning in a tide of memories, of Isabel's laughter echoing through the kitchen, the scent of her perfume on rainy mornings, the way she used to hum while washing the dishes. And now, somehow, all of it was staring back at him in the face of a stranger. Jonah looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad, are you okay?" Samuel blinked and nodded, though he wasn't sure what he was saying yes to. I'm sorry," he said, finally finding his voice and turning toward the waitress. "It's just, you remind me so much of someone I used to know." She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her expression. "I see. I get that sometimes. I must have one of those faces," she said lightly, though her smile faded just a little. "What's your name?" Samuel asked, almost afraid of the answer. She hesitated. "Emily," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Emily Harper." The name meant nothing to him, but everything else about her screamed familiarity. Emily's brows drew together slightly. Is everything all right?" Samuel exhaled slowly. "I lost someone once. Someone who looked just like you." Emily's eyes softened. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "That must have been very painful." He nodded, his voice tight. "It was." Emily glanced toward the kitchen door. "I have a break coming up in 10 minutes. If you want to talk." Samuel looked at Jonah. The boy gave a hopeful little shrug. "Yes," Samuel said, "I'd like that very much." The little courtyard behind the cafe was quiet, tucked away from the bustle of the main street. A few wooden chairs sat beneath an old oak tree, its branches casting slow-moving shadows on the ground as the late sun sank lower in the sky. Samuel and Jonah sat side by side, the boy sipping from a tall glass of lemonade. Across from them, Emily Harper stirred her iced coffee with a straw, her expression cautious but open. "So," she said after a moment, her eyes flickering between father and son, "you said I look like someone?" Samuel nodded slowly. "My wife, Isabel, she passed away 3 years ago." Emily's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. "I'm sorry, that's hard." Samuel managed a faint smile. "Yeah, it still is," some days more than others. Emily looked down at the table, then back up at him. What was she like? He took a breath, unsure where to begin. She had this quiet strength about her, the kind of person who didn't need to say much to be understood. She loved music, especially old jazz. She used to dance barefoot in the living room while it played. Her laugh, it could turn a bad day around in seconds. Emily blinked rapidly and looked away for a moment. She sounds beautiful. She was, Samuel whispered. For a few minutes, they let the silence settle between them, not heavy, but tender. Then Jonah leaned forward. You really do look like her. Even your eyes, they're the same. Emily smiled softly at him. I suppose everyone has a twin somewhere, right? Maybe, Samuel said, but this feels different. Emily looked at them thoughtfully. Well, maybe there's a reason. I mean, I don't know much about where I come from. Samuel's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? Emily exhaled. I was raised in foster care. I never knew my parents. I was told I was left at the doorstep of a group home when I was just a baby. No name, no family history. Just a note with my birth date, April 17th. The glass in Samuel's hand slipped slightly, and he caught it with a sudden jolt. His face turned pale. Did you say April 17th? Emily nodded, unsure. Yeah, why? He swallowed, leaning forward as if trying to study her more closely. That was Isabel's birthday, too. Emily froze. Her lips parted and her eyes widened. You're kidding. I'm not. Jonah looked between the two adults, confused and intrigued. Wait, could they have been sisters? Emily laughed nervously. No, I mean, I grew up alone. I was the only girl in the home my age. They said no one ever came looking for me. Samuel's mind spun. Isabel had always spoken of feeling incomplete, like there was someone out there she hadn't yet met. She told him about her own upbringing, how she'd been adopted at age 3 with no records of siblings or family. But she'd clung to this unshakable belief that she wasn't alone in the world. What if she hadn't been? Did you ever try to find out where you were born? Samuel asked gently. Emily nodded. I did, but the records were vague. Some files got lost when the center shut down. All I have is a copy of a name they gave me in that birthday. No parents, no hometown, just shadows. Samuel leaned back, his eyes distant. Isabel never found anything either. She always thought maybe, just maybe, she had a sibling somewhere. She used to say it felt like there was a missing piece in her life. Emily blinked rapidly again, then looked down at her hands. Maybe that's why I've always felt that too. I never knew what I was searching for, but I've always felt incomplete. The air grew still. A hush of meaning settled between them like dust and sunlight. Even Jonah seemed to sense it. I know this might sound crazy, Samuel said, voice thick with emotion, but you don't just look like her. You move like her. Your laugh, even your voice, it's uncanny. Emily smiled faintly but uncertainly. Coincidences can be strange. But how many coincidences are too many? Samuel asked. Same face, same voice, same birthday, same history of being orphaned. If Isabel were here, she'd be asking the same questions I am now. Jonah leaned forward again, whispering to Emily. Maybe you really were sisters, like separated at birth or something. Emily let out a shaky laugh, wiping at the corner of her eye. That sounds like something out of a movie. Maybe, Samuel said, or maybe it's something out of a life that still has missing pieces. Emily stared at the sunlight flickering through the branches above. Her heart pounded against her ribs. What would we even do to find out? There's one way to be sure, Samuel said. A DNA test. Emily flinched slightly. You really think it's possible? I do, Samuel said quietly. And if it is, you deserve to know. Isabel deserved to find you. Emily nodded slowly, eyes misty. Then let's do it. I want to know the truth. The following morning dawned gray and overcast, a soft drizzle coating the streets like a thin veil. Samuel sat behind the wheel of his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, his thoughts churning restlessly beneath a calm exterior. In the passenger seat, Jonah swung his legs back and forth, a nervous sort of excitement bubbling under his quiet demeanor. Emily stood on the sidewalk outside the small family clinic, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The moment Samuel pulled up, she climbed in beside him without a word, her eyes fixed ahead. "You okay?" Samuel asked gently. "I think so," she replied, though her voice trembled. "I didn't sleep much." "Neither did I," he admitted with a soft chuckle. "Even Jonah was up early." Jonah smiled shyly. "I kept dreaming about Aunt Emily." Emily turned to him, eyes widening. "Aunt," he nodded seriously. "That's what I'm going to call you if this is real." She smiled faintly. "You don't even know me." "You remind me of someone who loved me a whole lot," he replied. "That's enough." Emily's heart ached at the simple, sincere words. She didn't know what the test results would say, but the warmth in that little boy's voice already felt like home. They walked into the clinic together, quiet, sterile, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to the air. A kind-faced nurse guided them to a small room. The process was straightforward, just a cheek swab, a form, a signature. "Results in about a week," the nurse said kindly as she sealed the samples. When they stepped back outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were beginning to part, letting thin beams of sunlight streak across the sky. "Thank you for doing this," Emily said quietly as they stood by the truck. Samuel nodded. "Whatever the result is, you're not alone anymore. That's what matters." Over the next few days, time crawled. Emily returned to work, but her mind wandered constantly. Every smile from a customer reminded her of the what-ifs. Every mirror she passed made her study her own reflection. Was this her face or their face? Could she truly belong to someone, to somewhere, to someone's story? Samuel, too, found himself lost in memories. Late at night, he would pull out old photo albums of Isabel, studying her features, her smile, the tilt of her head. The similarities with Emily were too perfect to ignore. And Jonah, sweet Jonah, talked constantly about how fun it would be to have an aunt. He drew pictures of their future together, scribbling "me plus dad plus Aunt Emily" in colorful markers, posting them on the fridge like prophecies he believed in with all his heart. Then one evening, Emily's phone buzzed, a message from Samuel. "The results are in." Her breath hitched, her fingers trembled. She pressed the call button with a heart pounding like a drum. "I can come pick you up," Samuel said on the other end. "I'm at the cafe," she replied, her voice small. 15 minutes later, his truck pulled into the alley beside the restaurant. Emily climbed in, her gaze immediately drawn to the white envelope resting in his hands. The air felt heavy, like the space before a storm. Samuel looked at her. "Do you want to open it, or should I tell you?" She hesitated. "You tell me." His voice was gentle. "Your sisters." The world stilled. Emily's lips parted in disbelief. Her body went cold, then warm, then cold again. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. I, I had no idea," she whispered. "I didn't know she existed, and now it's too late." Samuel reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Isabel always felt like someone was missing. She just didn't know how to find you." Emily sobbed quietly. She hadn't known love could feel like grief, that finding something could also break your heart. But in the wreckage of what was lost, she found something else. A beginning. A family. Jonah peeked over the seat. "Aunt Emily?" he said timidly. She laughed through her tears. "Yeah, baby, Aunt Emily." He grinned. "You're going to stay with us now, right?" Emily looked at Samuel, then back at Jonah. Her chest rose and fell as if trying to catch up with a life that had finally made sense. "Yes," she said softly. "If you'll have me, I'll stay." The house at the end of Willow Lane stood quiet in the glow of evening. It wasn't grand or luxurious, just a modest two-story home with a red brick chimney and a porch swing that creaked gently in the wind. But to Emily Harper, it looked like something out of a dream she didn't know she'd been having in all her life. As Samuel parked in the driveway and turned off the engine, she hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. Samuel turned to her. "You don't have to unpack all at once, or at all if it doesn't feel right. Just stay a night or two. That's all I'm asking." Emily looked past him toward the front door, where Jonah stood with his arms wide open and an eager grin on his face. "I already made up your room," he called out proudly. She smiled, her nerves melting just a little. Inside, the house was filled with the smell of warm apple pie. Soft jazz drifted from a speaker in the corner, the kind of music Isabel used to play. Samuel had lit a few lamps instead of using the overhead lights, bathing the space in a soft amber hue that made everything feel safe and lived in. "This used to be Isabel's library," Samuel said, opening a small door off the hallway. "She used to spend hours in here, reading, journaling, dreaming." Emily stepped inside the room, which had been transformed into a cozy guest space. A twin bed with a floral quilt, a shelf of old books, and a photograph of Isabel on the nightstand. Emily walked over and touched the frame. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She would have loved you," Samuel said quietly. That night over dinner, Jonah told stories from school, described in great detail the science project he was building, a model of the solar system with glow-in-the-dark planets, and insisted Emily help him paint the rings on Saturn. Emily laughed, genuinely laughed, in a way she hadn't for years. Later, when the dishes were done and Jonah had gone to bed, Samuel poured 2 cups of tea and joined Emily on the back porch. "I still can't believe this," she murmured, watching the stars blink above. "Me either," Samuel admitted. "But some things, they're meant, even if they arrive late." She looked at him. "Do you think it would have made a difference if Isabel had found me?" Samuel didn't answer right away. Then, with a deep breath, he said, "She would have fought to keep you close. I know that for sure." Emily wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I feel like I've stumbled into someone else's life." "No," he replied. "You've just finally walked into your own." The days that followed were slow and healing. Emily didn't move her things in right away, but each morning she returned to the house. She helped Samuel prepare breakfast, braided Jonah's hair for Crazy Hat Day at school, and sometimes just sat quietly in the living room, flipping through Isabel's old journals. Everywhere she looked, there was a piece of her sister, her handwriting, her photos, even a forgotten sweater still folded in the linen closet. Yet instead of hurting, those pieces began to feel like soft threads, weaving her gently into a life she never had, but somehow always needed. On the third morning, Jonah burst into the kitchen with a drawing. "Look, it's us." He had sketched 3 smiling stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. The middle one wore a dress labeled Aunt Emily. Emily held the paper to her chest. "Can I keep this?" "Only if you promise to stay forever," Jonah said with a solemn nod. She glanced at Samuel, who smiled and shrugged. "Told you he was persuasive." That night, Emily brought a single suitcase back to Willow Lane. As she stood in her new room, her room, she ran her hands across the bookshelf. Each spine, each story carried fingerprints of her sister. And now hers too. For the first time in her life, Emily Harper wasn't just surviving. She was belonging. The rain came down gently that morning, tapping against the window pane like a distant lullaby. Inside the house, all was still. Jonah had already left for school, and Samuel had gone to the hardware store to fix the squeaky porch swing that Emily insisted she loved just the way it was. Alone, with a cup of warm chamomile tea in hand, Emily wandered back into the quiet room that once belonged to Isabel, a sanctuary of books, old letters, and memories suspended in time. She stood before the bookshelf, letting her fingers trace the worn spines of old novels, many with dog-eared corners and pencil scribbles in the margins. But on the second shelf, half hidden behind a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, she found a small stack of leather-bound journals, each with Isabel's delicate handwriting, etched on the covers in gold ink. They smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Emily sat down in the window nook, pulled a knitted blanket over her lap, and opened the first journal. April 17th, another birthday. I should feel happy, grateful. But I keep having that same dream, a girl with my eyes standing just out of reach. I try to call to her, but she never hears me. She just stands there watching, like she knows me, but I don't know her. What does it mean? Why do I feel like part of me is still missing? Emily's breath caught. She turned the page with trembling fingers. They say I was left at the steps of the church with no name, no history, just a thin blanket and a note with my birthday. But I always wondered, did I have a sister? A twin? Why else do I feel so incomplete? Like half a song, missing its melody. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She had written nearly the same thoughts in her own journal just 2 years ago. When I married Samuel, I told him I'd stop searching. But the truth is, I still look. In faces on the street, in strangers on the train. I don't know what I expect to find. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm not meant to find her. But if she's out there, I hope she's okay. I hope she feels loved. Even if I never meet her, I hope some part of my heart reaches hers across the miles. Emily closed the journal against her chest and wept, not just for Isabel, but for the girl in the dream, for the countless nights they had likely cried the same tears in different corners of the world. A gust of wind rattled the window and made the leaves outside tremble like delicate hands reaching for something just beyond their grasp. When she finally opened the second journal, a photograph fell out. It was a black and white print, worn at the edges, slightly faded. Two girls, maybe 4 years old, standing beside each other, clutching hands. Both had dark hair, the same crooked smile. On the back, scribbled faintly in pencil, Emily and Belle, 1993, sisters. Emily's hands shook. She ran to Samuel, who had just stepped in with a toolbox in one hand and a dripping umbrella in the other. "Samuel," she said breathlessly. "Look." He set everything down and took the photo. His eyes widened. "That's her," he whispered. "That's Isabel, but is that you?" Emily nodded. "I think it is." "Where did you find this?" "In the second journal. She kept dreaming about me. She knew. She felt me, even if she couldn't name me." Samuel stepped closer and gently wrapped his arms around her. "You found her. In every word. In every page." "I think she was waiting for me," Emily said, her voice cracking. "Not just in life, but here, in this house, in these journals. In you and Jonah." Samuel held her tighter. "And now she's brought you home." Emily looked back down at the photo, tracing the outline of the two girls with her finger. 1,000 memories she didn't know she had flickered behind her eyes. Laughter in a sunlit garden, the smell of crayons and crayons, tiny hands learning to tie shoes, a sister's hug. She whispered to the photo, to the words in the journals, to the past that had finally found its way home. "I'm here now, Belle. I found you, too." The days began to fold into each other like pages turning in a well-worn novel, each one a little warmer, a little fuller than the last. Emily now woke to the soft hum of life in a home that breathed with memory and hope. The aroma of Samuel's morning coffee drifted down the hallway. Jonah's footsteps thundered like miniature storms across the floor as he got ready for school. And for the first time in years, Emily didn't dread waking up. She didn't feel lost in a world that had forgotten her name. She had a place now, and with that place came the courage to look inward. One evening after dinner, as the sun melted into streaks of gold over the hills, Samuel stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing plates, his sleeves rolled up and his brow furrowed in thought. Emily sat at the table watching him, noticing how quietly he moved, how naturally he had stepped into fatherhood and now into something else. A gentle rhythm existed between them, a kind of peace that didn't need words. "Do you ever miss her out loud?" Emily asked, surprising even herself with the question. Samuel turned, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Every day," he said simply. "But lately, it feels more like remembering than missing." Emily nodded. "I read more of her journals today. She really loved you." "I know," he said, his voice thickening. "And I loved her. But grief is strange, Emily. It comes in waves, then softens like sand smoothed by the tide. Some mornings I still wake expecting to hear her voice. But now, when I do, it doesn't ache the way it used to." She looked down at her cup, fingers tracing its rim. "I spent so many years trying not to want anything. I thought it would hurt less if I just stayed small, quiet, unnoticed." Samuel stepped closer, resting a hand on the back of her chair. "But you're not invisible anymore." Emily looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "I don't want to be." He smiled. "Good." In the weeks that followed, she started painting again. It had been years since she picked up a brush. But one morning, after dropping Jonah off at school, she found herself drawn to the old shed behind the house, Isabel's old art studio. Dust motes danced in the air as she opened the door, revealing easels, jars of stiff brushes, and half-finished canvases covered in white sheets like forgotten dreams. Emily stood in the center of it all, inhaling the scent of turpentine and memory. Then, without thinking, she pulled off the covers, picked up a brush, and began. The first strokes were timid. A sky, a river, a girl's face. It wasn't meant to be Isabel, but somehow the resemblance surfaced all the same. A soul suspended in paint. Samuel came to check on her later that day, stepping into the doorway quietly, as if afraid he might disturb the spell. "Wow," he whispered. Emily laughed self-consciously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It's rough. It's beautiful, she blushed. It's just a start. Isn't everything? He said. That night over dinner, Jonah exclaimed, Dad, did you know Aunt Emily paints? Like real paintings. You should see the one she did today. Samuel smiled at her across the table. I did. Jonah beamed. We should make a gallery wall, like for real, in the hallway. Emily laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why not? Samuel said. Maybe it's time we filled these walls with new memories. She looked at him, something soft blooming in her chest. For so long, she had only ever looked back into a fog of questions and longing. But now she was starting to look forward, to mornings with purpose, to days with laughter, to nights that didn't feel so alone. One weekend, they visited a local farmer's market. Jonah ran ahead, chasing the scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh kettle corn. Emily walked beside Samuel, their arms occasionally brushing. People strolled past in every direction, but in that moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Sometimes I wonder, she said, if Isabel would have wanted this. Samuel turned to her. This? You and me, finding comfort in each other. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think she'd be proud. Proud? She loved deeply, and she always believed in second chances. She would have wanted you to have ones. Me too. Emily reached for his hand without thinking. Maybe this isn't a second chance, she said. Maybe it's the first real one. And in the middle of the market crowd, under a sky beginning to clear, Samuel squeezed her hand gently. Not as a man holding on to grief, but as someone opening a new chapter. Not to replace what was lost, but to honor it. The air was thick with the scent of autumn leaves. Outside the windows, the trees of Willow Lane had turned golden and red, their branches swaying in the wind like dancers in slow motion. The season of change had arrived, and with it, something quietly shifted in Emily's heart. She noticed it first in the small silences. The way Samuel looked at her just a little longer after dinner. The way his hand brushed against hers as they reached for the same plate. The way he stood a bit closer when they walked Jonah to school. It wasn't forced. It wasn't hurried. It was gentle, like the way dew appears on the grass before morning realizes it's awake. Still, it scared her. One afternoon, as she cleaned out an old drawer in Isabel's studio, she found a sealed letter with her name on it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Isabel's delicate, looping script. Her hands trembled as she opened it. To the sister I always felt but never found, if you're reading this, then you exist. You were real all along. And I hope somehow you've come home. I don't know what kind of life you've lived. I don't know if it was filled with warmth or with ache. But I do know this, you are loved, even if it's by a ghost you've never met. Take care of Samuel and Jonah. They're my heart, but more than that, let them be yours if you can. Don't be afraid to love what's left. Even when love hurts, it heals more than it breaks. Emily folded the letter gently, pressed it to her chest, and cried. Not from pain, but from the sheer weight of being seen by someone she'd never even met. That evening, they all sat curled on the couch watching an old movie. Jonah had dozed off halfway through, head resting on Emily's shoulder. Samuel sat close, his arms stretched along the back of the couch, not touching her, but near enough to feel the warmth of him. Emily's heart thudded loud in her ears. She could feel the words rising in her chest, but she didn't know how to say them. Finally, she whispered, Do you ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something beautiful, but you're afraid to fall? Samuel turned his head slowly toward her. All the time, he said. She looked down. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not ready? You're allowed to be scared, Emily, he said gently. But you're also allowed to be happy again. She nodded, unsure whether her tears were from fear or relief. He reached for her hand, their fingers brushing, then interlacing. You don't have to rush anything, he said. I'm right here. We'll go slow. Slow, she repeated, the words sinking into her like warmth beneath her skin. They sat like that for a long time. No declarations, no expectations, just two people learning to trust the rhythm of a new kind of love. Quiet, patient, healing. In the days that followed, their bond deepened not through grand gestures, but in everyday tenderness. Samuel would leave a cup of tea on the windowsill of the studio before heading to work. Emily would fold his laundry and slip in notes on sticky paper. Don't forget your lunch. They laughed more. They talked deeper. And when the silence fell between them, it was never empty. It was full of all the things they didn't need to say. But still, Emily carried the weight of doubt like a stone in her pocket. One night, lying awake in the quiet room that had once belonged to Isabel, she whispered into the darkness, "Is it okay to love him?" And though there was no answer, no voice in the night, she felt a softness stir in the air, as though her sister's spirit exhaled, peaceful and full of blessing. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains and lit the pages of the journal on her lap, Emily made a decision. She would not live her life in fear of happiness. She had lost. Yes, but she had also found, and now she would allow herself to be found in return. The first snow came early that year. It blanketed Willow Lane in a soft hush, muffling the world like a lullaby. Emily stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass, watching Jonah build a tiny snowman in the yard. Mittens too big for his hands, laughter rising in puffs of cold air. Behind her, Samuel was making breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, and that citrus marmalade Emily had once offhandedly mentioned she loved. She didn't even know he remembered. He always remembered. "Come eat," he called softly. She turned from the window, her heart impossibly full. At the table, their hands brushed as they reached for the same spoon. Emily looked up, and Samuel was already looking at her. The moment stretched. "I've been waiting for the right time," he said quietly. "But maybe there's no such thing." Emily's breath caught. "I care about you, Em, more than I've let myself admit. And not because you remind me of Isabel, because you're you. Brave, thoughtful, funny, and because I feel whole when you're here." She looked down, her eyes misty. "I feel the same, and that terrifies me." He reached across the table, took her hand. "Then let's be scared together." And just like that, something in her heart softened and settled. Love had crept in slowly, carefully, but now it stood tall between them. Strong, undeniable. They leaned in. No rush, no pressure. Just two people meeting halfway across a bridge built from shared pain and new beginnings. But just as their foreheads touched, a knock echoed at the front door. Samuel pulled back, eyebrows drawn. "Expecting someone?" Emily shook her head. He went to the door, opening it with a smile that quickly faded. A man stood there, tall, windblown, and carrying a small leather bag. "Can I help you?" Samuel asked cautiously. The man removed his cap. "I'm looking for Emily Harper." Emily stood frozen behind Samuel, heart thudding. Her past had not knocked. It had burst in uninvited. "Eli?" she whispered. The man turned to her, his face softening. "Emily, you look different." She stepped forward slowly. "What are you doing here?" Samuel stepped aside, confused. Jonah peeked from around the corner. "I heard you were here," Eli said. "Took me a while to find you." Samuel glanced at Emily, his concern deepening. "Who is he?" She took a shaky breath. "He's someone I used to know a long time ago." Eli stepped in, eyes scanning the room. "Can we talk?" Emily nodded slowly. "Just us." Samuel, though reluctant, gave her space. They sat in the den, the fireplace crackling low, casting long shadows across the floor. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Emily said. Eli looked at her with a mixture of regret and affection. "I didn't mean to leave like that. I wasn't ready back then. You needed more than I could give." "You didn't just leave," she said quietly. "You vanished. I thought you were dead." "I know," he murmured, "and I've lived with that guilt every day since." Emily folded her arms, bracing herself. "So why now?" Eli reached into his bag and pulled out a small manila envelope. "Because I finally found the courage to do what I should have done a long time ago." She opened it slowly. Inside was a birth certificate and a photograph. A child. A boy. Her hands trembled. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't either," Eli said. "Not until last year. His name's Max. He's 7, and he wants to meet his mother." The world tilted. Samuel stepped into the room just as Emily sank into the couch, pale and stunned. He knelt beside her. "Emily?" She looked at him, her eyes wide and wet with disbelief. I I have a son." Samuel's breath caught, and for a moment everything was quiet. The fire crackled, The snow tapped softly on the windows. The life they had just begun building now trembled on an uncertain ground. The silence after the revelation was thick and unyielding. Samuel stood frozen beside Emily, still kneeling on the carpeted floor. Eli sat on the edge of the armchair across from them, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes downcast. Outside, the snow continued to fall, dusting the world in white, as if trying to cover over the storm now brewing within the walls of the Reynolds home. Emily clutched the photo of the boy to her chest, her knuckles pale. "His name is Max," she whispered again, as if repeating it would make it feel more real. Samuel sat back slowly, processing everything. "Emily, are you saying this is your child?" She nodded, breath-catching. "I didn't know. Eli left before I even had the chance to tell him I was pregnant. And by the time I realized I might be, it was already too late. I searched, but there was no trace of him. Then things happened. I lost my job, my apartment. I didn't have the baby. I thought maybe it was just a scare, a false alarm." Eli looked up. "You didn't know?" "I never had confirmation," she said, voice shaking. "No doctor, no support, nothing. I was 21, alone. I didn't even think I'd live past that year." Eli ran a hand through his hair. "He was adopted. After his mother, the woman I was with after you, passed away suddenly. He ended up in foster care. I've only had custody since last spring. When I saw his birth records and realized the timing, I started digging." Emily stared at the photograph again. The boy had sandy hair, big eyes, a tentative smile. Something in his expression reminded her of her own childhood, of longing. "I need to meet him," she said, her voice breaking. "I have to." Samuel stood up, nodding slowly. "Of course you do." Eli rose as well, his voice gentle. "I didn't come here to disrupt anything. I just thought, if he has a mother out there, he deserves to know." He glanced at Samuel. "You seem like good people, and he's not looking to be taken away from anyone. I just want Max to know the truth." Samuel gave a short nod. "We understand." Eli turned to Emily. "I'll come back tomorrow afternoon if that's okay. I'll bring him. I think he'd want to meet you." Emily nodded wordlessly, and within minutes Eli was gone, leaving behind a stillness far louder than his presence. That night, Emily sat alone in Isabel's studio, wrapped in a thick blanket, the photo of Max beside her on the table, lit by a single reading lamp. Samuel entered quietly, carrying a cup of hot tea. He placed it beside her, then sat opposite her, not saying anything at first. "I should have told you everything," she whispered. "You didn't know," he said softly. "And even if you had, you were a different person then." Emily looked up at him, her voice cracking. "I'm scared." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Of what?" "That I'll lose all of this," she said. "You, Jonah, this home, the life we were building." Samuel leaned in gently. "You're not going to lose me because of your past. We all carry shadows, Emily, but they don't erase the light we've built." She looked down at his hand on hers. "But what if I have to choose between them?" "You don't," he said firmly. "Max deserves to know his mother, and you deserve to know your son. But none of that changes how I feel about you." Emily's lips trembled. "You really mean that?" He smiled faintly. "I'm not going anywhere." Her heart cracked open a little more. She let the silence wrap around them like a soft shawl. The next day arrived in a flurry of nerves. Emily spent hours pacing the living room, rearranging throw pillows, lighting a candle, turning it off again. Jonah stood by the window, peeking through the curtains every few seconds. "He's just a kid," Samuel said gently. "He's probably more nervous than you." Emily nodded, though her heart felt like a ticking clock wound too tightly. Then, tires on gravel, a car door shutting, Eli stepped out first, followed by a small boy with a backpack and a red beanie tugged low over his ears. Emily held her breath. Max looked up at the house, then at the man beside him. Eli placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered something that made him nod. They walked to the porch together. Knocked. Samuel opened the door. "Come on in." Emily stood in the hallway, her hands folded, knees trembling. Max stepped inside and looked around, eyes wide but curious. Eli knelt beside him. "Max, this is Emily." The boy stared at her. Emily dropped to one knee, keeping her voice soft. "Hi." Hi, he said, clutching the straps of his backpack. She smiled, tears in her eyes. You don't have to say anything you don't want. I'm just really happy to see you. He blinked, then asked, Are you really my mom? Emily swallowed. Yes, I didn't know I had a son until just recently. But yes, I'm your mom. Max tilted his head. Do you like video games? She let out a breathy laugh. I've never played one, but I'd love to learn if you teach me. He smiled. Eli looked down at him. Why don't you sit with her for a bit? I'll be right here. Max walked over and sat beside her on the couch. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small action figure. This is Leo, he's my favorite. Emily gently touched the figure's hand. Nice to meet you, Leo. Max looked up at her. You kind of look like me. I was thinking the same thing, she whispered. Samuel, watching from the doorway, smiled quietly as Jonah stepped beside him. Does that mean I have a cousin now? Looks like it, Samuel whispered. And just like that, the house shifted again. Not breaking, not falling apart, but expanding, making room for something unexpected, something sacred, family. The next morning, sunlight streamed gently through the kitchen window, casting soft golden patches on the tiled floor. Emily stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, one eye on the batter, the other on the boy sitting quietly at the kitchen table. Max, her son. He sat with his hands folded in front of him, studying the syrup bottle as if it held the secrets of the universe. His red beanie now rested on the table beside him, revealing a mop of soft brown curls, just like hers at that age. Pancakes are almost ready, she said with a nervous smile. He nodded but said nothing. Emily flipped the last pancake and plated them with trembling hands. She placed the dish in front of him, along with a glass of orange juice. Max looked up. Thanks. You're welcome, she replied softly, her heart squeezing at the simple word. Jonah came bounding down the stairs a minute later, sliding into his chair with all the energy of a sunrise. Morning, Max, he chirped. Do you like syrup? My mom, Aunt Emily makes the best pancakes. Emily's breath caught for just a moment. Max gave a small smile. Yeah, I like syrup. Samuel entered shortly after, pressing a kiss to Emily's cheek as he reached for his coffee. It was a natural motion, but Emily stiffened. She wasn't sure if Max noticed, but he had. His eyes flicked between them. Samuel caught her glance and gave a quiet nod. It's okay, he seemed to say. After breakfast, the boys moved to the living room. Jonah turned on a cartoon, and Max followed hesitantly, perching on the edge of the couch like a guest afraid to relax. Emily watched from the doorway, her heart aching at the distance that still lingered in Max's posture. Later, as Jonah ran outside to build a snow fort, Emily found Max alone, sitting on the floor of the spare bedroom they'd prepared for him. Can I come in? She asked gently. He nodded without turning around. She sat beside him, watching him line up his small action figures on the rug. You okay? He shrugged. Is this too weird? She asked, trying to smile. He paused, then whispered, It's just, I don't know how to do this. Emily nodded slowly. Me either. He looked up at her, startled. I've never been a mom before, she said honestly. Not really, I'm scared too, but I want to try, if you're willing to let me. Max was quiet for a long time. Then he reached for one of the action figures, a soldier with a missing leg, and handed it to her. This one's the bravest, he said. Emily held it gently in her palm. He looks like he's been through a lot. He has, Max said, but he always keeps going. She looked at the kid, then at him. Just like you. Max gave a tiny nod. It wasn't a hug, it wasn't an I love you, but it was something, a start. Over the next few days, the household began to shift in small, meaningful ways. Emily packed 2 lunchboxes each morning now. Jonah's with turkey and mustard, Max's with peanut butter and sliced apples. Just how he liked. She helped Max with his homework, sitting beside him at the kitchen table, their knees occasionally bumping as they both leaned in to figure out long division problems. He didn't call her mom, not yet, but he no longer looked away when she tucked him into bed. He no longer stiffened when she reached to straighten his collar. One night, as the snow fell outside and the fire crackled gently in the hearth, Emily sat between Jonah and Max on the couch, reading aloud from a book. Her voice was calm, rhythmic, wrapping them in a cocoon of sound and safety. Jonah leaned his head on her shoulder. Max didn't, but he scooted a little closer. Samuel watched from the armchair, his heart swelling with a kind of peace he hadn't known he needed. After the boys were tucked in, he joined Emily in the kitchen as she loaded the dishwasher. "You're doing great," he said. "I feel like I'm fumbling through it," she confessed. "Maybe," he said, "but Max notices. He may not show it yet, but he sees you trying. That matters." Emily leaned against the counter. "Do you think he'll ever call me Mom?" Samuel thought for a moment. "I think he might, one day, when he's ready, and when he does, it'll mean everything." That night, Emily opened her journal for the first time in years. She wrote, "Day by day, this house is becoming a home, and this role, this wild, unfamiliar role of mother, is slowly becoming something I no longer fear. I may not know the right words. I may stumble, falter, question myself. But I love him. I love him more than I thought possible. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes me a mother after all." She set the journal aside and stepped quietly into the hallway. Outside Max's door, she paused, hand resting lightly on the frame. From inside, she heard a soft voice. "Good night, Mom." It was barely more than a whisper, but she heard it, and she cried silently, hand pressed to her mouth, because in that one word, everything had changed. It was a gray Sunday morning, the kind that made the world feel still and heavy with thought. A light drizzle patterned the windows, and inside the house, the usual energy was muted. Jonah lay on the living room rug, surrounded by markers and coloring books. Samuel was in the garage repairing a loose cabinet door. Emily moved quietly through the house, folding laundry, listening to the gentle hum of the dryer and the soft pitter-patter of rain. Max was quiet that morning, quieter than usual. He sat alone on the window seat in the upstairs hallway, knees tucked to his chest, staring out at the mist-draped street below. Emily noticed him as she passed, and something in his posture stopped her. She sat beside him slowly, folding her legs to mirror his. "Everything okay, Max?" He shrugged but didn't answer. Emily waited. "I had a bad dream last night," he finally said, voice barely audible. "What kind of dream?" "I was back there," he said, "at the other house, the one with Mrs. Parker." Emily's heart clenched. She knew the name, one of the foster parents Max had lived with before Eli found him. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "She wasn't always mean," he began. "At first, she gave me candy, let me watch cartoons. But then, if I messed up even a little, she'd get so mad." Emily placed her hand gently over his. "She'd lock me in the closet," he said, his voice flat now, as if telling someone else's story. "With no light, for hours, sometimes all night, and she'd say, 'This is what bad kids get.'" Emily's chest tightened. She felt nausea rise at the thought of him, her son, huddled in the dark, afraid, unloved. "She said I didn't deserve to be part of her family, that I'd never be anyone's real son." Max looked up at her then, and his eyes shimmered with something old and deep. "Sometimes I still think she's right." Emily swallowed back a sob. She wanted to take his pain and tear it from him like rotten roots. But all she could do was hold him, gently, fiercely, without words. "That's not true, Max," she whispered. "None of that is true. You are good. You are worthy. And you are my son." He blinked. "Even after everything?" "Especially after everything." He leaned into her then, not fully, not all at once, but just enough. His shoulder touched her arm, and she wrapped him in her embrace. They sat like that for a long time. Later that evening, when Samuel returned and Jonah was upstairs brushing his teeth, Emily sat down with him in the quiet kitchen and told him everything. Samuel listened with tears in his eyes. When she finished, he took a long breath. "He's been through so much," he said, "and yet he's still open, still trying." Emily nodded. "He's brave, braver than I've ever been." "You're brave too," Samuel said softly, "and you're doing everything right." Emily shook her head. "I don't know what I am doing. I'm just loving him the best way I know how." "And that," Samuel said, placing a hand over hers, "is exactly what he needs." That night, Emily sat beside Max as he drifted off to sleep. She didn't say anything. She just stayed, because sometimes presence is more healing than any word could be. As the rain continued to fall outside, she knew something had shifted. Max had let her in, not just into his room, but into the shadows of his past. And she had not turned away. She had stayed. And that, more than anything, was what motherhood meant. Spring arrived like a gentle apology after the long, aching winter. The trees along Willow Lane blossomed in delicate pinks and whites, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and something new, something hopeful. Inside the Reynolds home, laughter rang from the kitchen as Emily scrambled to frost a slightly lopsided chocolate cake. Her apron was dusted in cocoa powder, and her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. Jonah danced around the table, setting out paper plates and plastic cups like it was the Queen's banquet. And Max? Max was at the kitchen counter, carefully placing candles into the cake, each one crooked, imperfect, but glowing with intention. "Can we light them now?" he asked, glancing at Emily. "Almost," she smiled. "We're waiting for Samuel." As if on cue, the front door opened, and in stepped Samuel, cheeks red from the brisk spring breeze, holding a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a small wrapped box in the other. "For the birthday boy," he grinned. Max beamed, stepping forward. "Thanks, Dad." It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Samuel froze for just a second, emotion flashing in his eyes. Then he knelt down and pulled Max into a firm, loving hug. "You have no idea how much that means to me," he whispered. Emily turned away quickly, blinking back tears, pretending to focus on the candles. The four of them gathered around the table. "Ready?" she asked. Max nodded, cheeks already pink with excitement. "Then blow out the candles and make a wish," she said. He did. The flames flickered out. They clapped and laughed. Jonah started singing off-key, and everyone joined in. As cake was served and presents were opened, the living room filled with the soft kind of joy that doesn't shout. It just stays, like a familiar song or the scent of something baking, the kind that settles into your bones and tells you, "You're home." Later, as the sun dipped below the hills, Emily sat on the porch with Max curled beside her, his head resting lightly against her shoulder. "Did you get everything you wanted today?" she asked. He nodded. "I didn't even need to wish for anything." "Oh?" He looked up at her, eyes full of peace. "Because I already have it." Emily kissed the top of his head, and for a long moment neither of them said a word. Behind them, Samuel played guitar softly while Jonah hummed along. Inside the house, photos now lined the hallway wall, pictures of Isabel, of Jonah growing up, and now new ones. Emily's paintings, Max's drawings, the four of them on a picnic, their first snowball fight, the day they planted a tree in the backyard. Emily had once thought love came like lightning, fast, powerful, dramatic. But this love, this family, it had come like sunrise, slow, patient, unstoppable. And as the last light of day faded over the neighborhood, she whispered softly, not just to Max, but to herself, to Isabel, and to the world that had once felt too big, too cold. "I'm not afraid anymore." Because she wasn't. She was home.